Hi everyone, welcome to another session of Open Books. Thank you all for coming. Today we have a real treat with the presence and presentation of Hidde Van Duym. Hidde was initially best known, I think, for his work in the humanities. He was director of the Washington Commission for the Humanities,
Yeah.
Is that correct? And when he received, on Bainbridge, when he received the Island Treasure Award, he was called Mr. Humanities, even though the award was in both the arts and the humanities. From the year 2000, it has been co-curator of every show in the book arts that was given at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts, and has been a major presence in the development of this room for the museum. He will give you his take on the wonderful world of artist books. And I do want to share, at one point when Hidde was making this for a show at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts, and I asked him how much it was going to be if he had set a price on it. And he said, well, if I paid myself a minimum wage, it would cost $27,000. But I think I'll sell it for a bit less. Do you remember that? Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Hidde Van Duym.
Well, thank you for coming. I'll just tell you the personal story that is involved in making this piece, which I just made. And I've been not active for quite a while, but this is a sort of a comeback for me. I was born in the Netherlands, and so my mother was born in 1904, and my father was born in 1880, so I have a personal connection with a long time ago. No, it's for me 100 years history. The moment 100 years ago is not troubling me because I'm personally connected with it. So what I have among the things that came out of my home is a set of little cards like this size. And so now I'm thinking back to when my mother told me, I found that little packet of cards in some of her belongings, and I said, Mom, what is this? And she said, oh, I got these as a child, and they are cards that were given about the First World War. And they are 100 cards with little records, photographic records of the First World War. And she remembered. She said, you know, when that war was announced, now Holland stayed neutral, but there was an announcement, and there was a man with a drum who would go from public square to public square and read off a proclamation. Now that's 100 years ago. I mean, that really, when I think of that intimacy of, you know, somebody doing that, you know, and being acquainted with a public event through the personal announcement with a drum, you know, I mean, it's just bizarre. I mean, think of that. So I'm looking at these cards, and now I'm here, my mother is gone, and I think, you know, that story, my mother was 10 years old when that war started. And so here are these cards, and they are cards made by a lemonade factory. And they say on it, please save these cards, and we will have, when you buy our lemonade, you get one of these cards, and we have an album available that you can glue these cards in, and keep that album very carefully because it will be something that will increase in value over time. You start to think about that, and you think, wait a minute, you're going to make money off lemonade using these little cards in a kind of recreational way. And I thought there's something very strange about that frame of thought. Not, it's used all the time. I mean, every advertisement does that all the time. It uses something that is, relates to one thing in you, and it uses to sell it in another way. So I thought, well, now these little cards, and I have these feelings about several things from my family, because they are a personal connection. But now the question is, how do you turn it into something that can be shared in another way? So how do you give it another life? So I started looking at the cards, and then picked out a number that I thought were very, very telling, quintessential, and I thought these are really stages of a drama called war. So, okay, so here you go. So this is a little house, a little theater, and it opens up.
Oh, wow.
And so for each part, I built this little stage. So act number 1 is the generals looking through the binoculars, setting the stage of war. Act 2 is getting all the armaments out to the front line. Act 3 is the guys setting up their machine guns. Act 4 are the disasters of war, this awful picture of this horse stuck in mud. They used horses in the First World War, and you begin thinking about that part. They even made gas masks for horses. It is just, and then you go to the final one, and it's in Holland. You would get a picture. This is 2 German soldiers, and of course they're in a wheelchair and so on, and one of them is carrying around. So this is really a tragic drama. It is so I used the text, and I gave it these 5 little, the 5 dramas, and on the stage each one it's act 1, act 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then, of course, more family holdings. This is a children's book my mother had, 1912 or something like that, and it has this group of children, and this little guy is in front with a saber. He's being the valiant fighter, etc. So here you are. That's how the dream carries on about the noble act of war. And then I also happen to have a children's book of my father, going back to actually somewhere around 1885 or whatever. It was given to him by his grandfather when he grew up, and it has the Germans have a really edgy kind of humor. It has a jester in it who shows you all of the follies of mankind. And it being a German children's book, it has jokes about the French, because the Germans hated the French as fools. So I couldn't resist using this gesture. Now the setting, okay, now I forgot to tell you about that. So in order to arrive at the drama part, I love toy theaters, and they are just amazing. So I used the front part. There are a lot of different ways. They were still made in the 40s, but I used the front cover of one of these toy theaters as the cover for this. So now, so I had the idea. It's a great idea, but next thing is, how do you do it, right? So first I thought, I'll just give you the problems. One of them is allowing for hinges so that this will fold out properly with room for viewing. So I experimented. And hinges, these 2, because I need a 360-degree fold on these. These go all the way. So you need to allow in the joint here for that to go, and that gives you a lot of other problems with how to cover it later on, because if you're going to have this space, you want it covered properly, etc., etc. So that's one. But the other thing is, you have this. If you want this to open, and you want these walls to stand rigid, you gotta have something that will hold them up. So then I thought, oh, well, wait a minute. That would need something, a floor that holds out so that it can stand. So then you start working on what should the bottom look like, and so I decided to break up the bottom in, sections. But then still you have the problem of how is this rigid. So there is a brace built into each one of these. So then the next question is what kind of brace, what do you do with it, how do you bend it properly, etc., and will it cover and will it look nice, all of those. So I found brass braces and built them in, and of course they create, I don't know how much detail you want, but if you put in a brace, that is uneven. So you then have to create another piece that will cover it properly so you have an even surface. So you need to etc. etc. So, what else can I tell you?
Is this the first hinged book you've made?
No. Well, I've made a lot of boxes. They're all hinges. And actually, I'm an expert on hinges. Although, well, so one more thing about hinges. These, so I experimented with how that would work, and I don't know whether you look for a model, and there are models for filing things, and when you file papers in one of these, I don't think people use them anymore, but you used to have ABCD, with the register on the right side. Right, but these fold open and they have room on the side for documents. And they have room because the hinge is relayed. They are specially built. There is room there for the documents to provide, for the documents to come in, and it's a special hinge when you look at it. They're somehow or another, and they're made with cloth, etc. So I looked at that. So one, I needed room, but then I realized also to fold this out, it needs to be recessed. It needs to come in, and that creates problems because you really need to address them when you start covering things. You need to get the hinge in and then cover this. So stage 1, hinge, stage 2, so you have a sequence. I'm going to share with you, I've been writing some of this down, and the word for that, and I got this because my wife was very good with, she was a very good seamstress, and she said these are called slopers. Slopers are the plan that you have for making clothes. It's what the factory uses ahead of time. It's the pattern, so to speak. So I made a description of how I work, and for some of this stuff, actually this is for boxes. It's 15 steps before you get to the end, because you've got to. It's a sequence. Particularly boxes, you've got to make sure that one thing is covered before another. That's a simple statement. I mean, it's a sequence. So yeah, so I have lots of drawings of how to do that. I'll just give you this one. You could just move it down there.
So you made a sloper for the...
I made slopers, and I didn't do any work for 3 years, and I'm so happy I made notes, because actually I use Wonder Under for applying the silk work. And I had forgotten how to work that stuff, so I'm so glad I wrote down all the notes.
Where do you get all this interesting stuff?
You just work at it. I got a lot of notes, so that's essentially my. Just move it down yeah, right. So, well, I that's my story, and I thought I'd link it to this piece.
Hidde, what is the material?
This happens to be Davy board.
It's what?
Davy bookboard.
Oh, bookboard.
But the boxes that I make are all foam core,
Mhm.
not wood, foam core. It's tricky, particularly if you put cloth on it, because the heat, one render is applied with an iron, so you got to be careful. But you go on the internet, you Google, and you say, and there is a whole blog of people who say, oh, yes, I worked with this and this went wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. So, very gratifying. Actually, I had experienced the problems before I got on the internet, but later on I found that I wasn't alone. So.
I would be curious to hear you talk about the dance with perfectionism, because obviously to do this kind of work you have to be so precise and so willing to keep doing it until it's perfect. And how is that for you anyway?
Scary question.
I know.
Scary question. I look at Julie Chen's work, I just can't stand it. It's perfect.
Oh.
I look at that and I think, oh my God, and then I think, well, I have this with some of my artwork too, because I do watercolors. And I think, at some point you got to show that this is one person who made it, not that it was something that's factory perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, on one hand I want to say, wait a minute, I made this, it's a one person's work. On the other hand, there are some awful standards out there. They are so good. You look around this room, I examine that stuff and I think, oh my God, how do I get there? I have a few people who I feel are close colleagues, including my deceased wife, who I would say, I want to go with this, and she would say, no, you can't. And she was a perfectionist. So, and I have two other close friends who say, well, I think it would look better if, etc. They're much nicer than my wife was. But she was very good. So, so you keep working at it.
So you use a sounding board, in other words?
Yes, yeah. Because, you're looking at all my secrets. Shame on you.
Well, how else am I going to find them out? I don't have my camera out.
All right. So,
Would you take us on a tour of the transcendental phonograph?
yes. Well, that's another, most of the things, the connection here is I ran into somebody who worked for a phone company in Montana, and I said, well, I have installed it, and he was taking all the phones out of the rural areas. And I said, what do you do with that? He says, oh, well, it goes into the warehouse. And I said, I want one. So he got me all the material that belongs to a standard phone, one of those phones along the highway in a booth, or on the side of a cafe or a bar or a restaurant. So, including the way they would have this little hook and then a chain, and then and this is authentic. I mean, this has been right out there on the prairie somewhere in a phone. And it's warped because that's what happens to it in the heat and the sun. And so then I thought, I gotta take this somewhere, just like this war piece. I've gotta give this a different life, some different way of feeling about it. So I thought it's gotta be a transcendental foam. So then, that meant making the booth, and now you go again, for things to be transcendental, all things divine are in gold. So this had to be gold inside, but now the thing is, how do you get that? So I took a class in gold, actually from somebody who makes icons, Russian icons. It was a Russian man who had been doing this all his life, and he gave a class in how, in making icons, and of course that meant also learning how to apply gold leaf, which is a challenge all of its own. but I managed, and so there you are. And then the phone book. Now, so I created this phone book, and I used a standard phone book that we have here, but I fuzzed it up. I took it on Photoshop and made it. If you look in here, you will find people probably because it's a possible Bainbridge phone book. But I fuzzed it up so that it's making it clear that this was meant in a different way. But then I added so this is the operator. So it's a long distance, please. If you've heard that song,
Yeah.
That's right. Operator. And I gave it let's say, a more long distance feel, and gave it categories. And here's the directory coverage area, and of course it is it's an extended landscape. It's a delta of a river that leads into space. And then I gave it all these interesting categories that give you some idea.
Could you read some of the categories,
Yeah,
please?
okay. Birth, body, family, fauna, flora, machines, money, nucleus, which I think is the idea, passages, which is something that I'm always fascinated by, portals, which I love. I mean, every box is a portal, really. Postage, power. So they're transients, trees, well, which is, these are all archetypal themes for transcendental things. And then this is the area coverage map, which is, of course, the universe, and that's it. So, right.
So is it actual gold leaf inside?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. No, no drafts. They just. I remember this man. I'll never forget it. It was so lovely. When you apply gold and then you want to paint on it. Actually, these icons. The paint does, in some areas, cover the what do we call it? The nimbus, the halo. So but when you apply paint, and it's done with egg yolk, or it's what they use is pigment and egg yolk. So, but when you do that, it bubbles. So because there's a different chemistry there, but you can interfere with that chemistry by using garlic. So, this is a Russian. So I never forget him saying, he said, garlic. He says, in summer it's very juicy. And here we were, working with the little, half-cut garlics, It's a hands-on guy. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm not sure what I'm saying, but talk to us a little bit about the actual phone. It seems like the essence of this piece is in the book.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
But that wouldn't make it without giving the lead-in of the phone. You gotta have the phone.
The phone is a tool to
Absolutely.
the journey.
Right. No, if I just gave you this, it would be fun. It's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
If you have this in front of you. I mean, I think that's the lead.
Yeah,
You got it. Yeah. Well, other questions? Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the graphics that you use to create the stages?
What do you mean by graphics?
Well, are these reproduction things you found online to create the?
No, I have a big book on toy theaters. And this is one of them. There are probably it's a book about toy theaters in the world. I mean, you know, but it's an English book though, so its focus is, I think, England and Germany. But so I have a choice. So I scanned this in, one of his theaters. I scanned it in, photoshopped it to the right size, altered some of the things in it to make it fit this. Took out what is here and replaced it with my Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. And then the backdrop, a friend of mine had some old materials that had been used in theaters, and it's this magic forest, you know, that was apparently a use it all for a lot of theaters, little theaters. So it was a wonderful thing to find. So I scanned that in, softened it up so it wouldn't command too much interest, and used that as a backdrop. Brought it down to size, you know, so, and adjusted it. There were some notes in it, and I took the notes out, you know, etc. in Photoshop. So then the cards, these are the pictures out of the little cards. So I took the 6 cards, scanned them in, took the picture, cut it to size, and clipped it. And then stood them up in here. And then, you know, then the rest of the job is the proper material for the stage, etc., etc. You know, I mean, then you start finessing it by one rule that a colleague of mine said: never show the inners. So, so I made sure that, you know, you disregard how they stand up, etc., by painting them properly, etc. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so there is a great deal of work of, well, I couldn't do that without Photoshop, you know, bringing that down to size. I mean, you know, bringing it into a, well, into its ultimately, what is that called? Decorum. I mean, it's the essence of decorum is that things fit together properly in color, in size, and, you know, it's the design issue. So, yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
where is your starting point typically? It seems with this, it was finding the cards from your...
That's emotional.
And what made you, I mean, at what point did you decide, okay, this needs to be a work of art, and if it is, if this is war, I mean, did the sort of pun of theater of war,
No, that came later.
That came
I more and more, the more I started thinking about it, the more I thought, you know, this is crazy. So, well, so there's an emotional factor there, because there was something about those cards. My mother hung on to those. So you're standing there. So it's not a dead object. It is an object with concentric circles of thought and feeling and memory. So then the next step is, how could I use that? So then you get involved with the content of it. And then I started looking at them, you know, and there's a lot of wonderful material in there, because World War I, all the heads of state that were involved in World War I, and there are dozens of them. I mean, it's not just England, it's Turks, it's Russian small countries, and they are in these enormous costumes with feathers and God knows what else. So in that sense, in terms of portraiture, it would have been wonderful also. So, but I thought, wait a minute, this is really, I've read a lot about World War I. So, so I know something about it. It was really the war of the century. It was a disastrous war, and it changed the world forever. It's not World War II, it's World War I changed the world forever. It really, everything happened at that time, including, how I mean, you know, my mother starting as a secretary and translation person and running an office for my father. So you know, so there's that moment. So then you start thinking, okay, how do I do that? And I thought, this is a drama. So then I started working on how do I do the drama. So then I thought, wait a minute, that's now what if I do stages? And I immediately thought of a toy theater. So, you know, so then you start looking, researching, you know, and I've read about toy theaters because they're in the box category. So, I mean, dioramas, you know, shrines, there are a whole number of things that are like, you know, that provide aperture to discover. And that is why I like book art, is because it is personal, it requires insight, it requires going through an experience. In other words, the format of it takes you through, it forces you to take some steps toward understanding. That is, and I think that's why people now why there is such a interest in book art, is because I think we are looking for validating personal experiences. And there's no other art that really does that. I think this is the art that validates that personal discovery. So then I got into the theaters, and then of course it becomes more and more of a technical problem on, you know, how do you do this? That's the part I hate.
Have you made
But-
mock-ups of how it does?
Endlessly, yes, yeah. No, I did make mock-ups, lots. You couldn't fool around with this without trying it out first. Have you heard of Joseph Cornell?
Yes.
He's, you know, the interesting thing is, you look at that and it looks so real. You know, all of the material he uses in there, he is a copy of what he had. He didn't use the originals. He had copies made. And so I do too, you know. I mean, these are all, now I'm a little farther along in terms of time. There are things, he didn't have Photoshop. So he had to work with, you know, the items, but he did have them copied. So when you see it, it was a discovery for me. I thought, of course, who would, you know, because if it's the only item you have and you cut it up, it's goodbye for any changes. And there are a lot of changes, you know, along the way. But, well,
So you still have the little cards.
I still have the little card.
Have you thought about making a box for them?
Well, you gotta, the older I get, the less time I find I have, in many ways. I mean, you know, so you've got to make choices about what you want to do. Right now, that's what I was going to do for this show that this is in, but I found that it was too complex, too close to, I want to do a, the Egyptians have in the tombs, they have on the caskets themselves and on the walls, and they have materials that they leave in the caskets that help the person find their way to final, you know, belonging to the universe. And I find that fascinating, you know, the thought of it. I'm not, you know, I don't mean scarab beetles, but the idea that you give somebody who has departed in your mind, it's really a reverse grieving process. Really, when you think of it, they spend all of this time telling the deceased, you know, be careful when so-and-so approaches, you know, here's your amulet so that you can handle that bad spirit. We want you to move on. Here's the next stage, you know. So they go through this. And really, that is a projection.
Yes.
They're really doing this themselves with the life of the deceased. I find that wonderful. I mean, that is just such a great process. So I want to make something that does that. So, but you know, there are a lot of steps you need to take before you get there. So anyway,
How long did it take you
this
from start to finish?
about 3 months. Yeah. But
Working every day, pretty much.
pretty much, yeah, at least 3 to 4 hours every day. Getting up in the morning, take another look at it. That's the start. Oh God. And then, you know, some of the things don't behave the way you wanted them to. There's always warping, no matter how good you are with paper and cardboard, you know, I mean, there's always. And many of the materials, they have, you know, material, that's another thing, you know, I mean, craft is about learning to have a dialogue with the material. And that's what it is. I think you're talking to what you're working with, and it tells you you're handling me right or you're not handling me right. Potters will tell you that. I mean, anyone working with materials will tell you that. And so you're there, you're going at it, and you know, it says, no, if you do this to me, you know, I'm not going to behave the way you want me to. So it is a dialogue, and so you know, and you're working. Book art, it's always new materials. I love watercolors, and some people say, you know, oh, I wouldn't touch watercolor, it's too difficult. But I find watercolor, you know, you find that at some point the material is very forgiving. You make things happen. One thing I like about watercolor is because it's unpredictable to some degree. So I interact with it, and I say, you know, if I do this, what are you going to do? And you know, and so there is a dialogue there, and there are things that don't happen the way, but you can correct your mistakes. So there is a forgivingness. I think that's what craft ultimately comes down to: is that you have a dialogue with the material that tells you, you know, I will work for you this way, but you know, and then you say, well, wait a minute, I'm very sorry, but then there are ways of handling it differently. Anyway, so.
Do you do each frame, each piece, all completely before you go to the next piece?
No.
No, good question. You go to the whole.
Go module if you can. Go multiples if you can. It saves time, right? You know, that's true of almost all pieces. I mean, you know. And because of a single item, you wouldn't, you know, there's just no reward financially for the time you spend. So the only way a book artist can make it is by doing multiples, you know, make 50 of one set. And I remember there was we had a discussion downstairs in the theater of that group with Luca Bean. And there was one woman who made 50 of the same. I thought, I don't think I could do it. I don't think I would have the patience, you know, so I'll just take. I have the luxury of being able to make unique pieces, you know, one of a kind. So it's a luxury, because if you're going to do this and you really want an income, you've got to make multiples. There's no question about it.
I love how the pictures all look 3D. Like there's such a 3D.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. I've succeeded. Thank you. Yeah, right. Right. Well, that was you know, actually I have a little toy theater, and this is exactly how it works. It has a little backdrop and then the supports up here and so on. So, but I narrowed it, you know, so that I could have it 5 times. So, then the buttons, you know, the little door closure. I love buttons. But you know, sometimes I've spent 2 days, 3 days on just deciding on the buttons. We speak of time and loss of time. You know, before you find something, and I have lots of buttons and they're never the right ones. So I finally, you know, and then of course, how should they be attached? There's a little brass pipe in there that holds it when you look. You know, no mistakes. I mean, this is sensitive a sensitive step. You drill a hole.
That's it.
If it's wrong, that's a one-timer, you know. So and then and then the little technical problem of what do you need to do so that this will hang down properly, aside from just choosing funny buttons, nice buttons. Actually, yeah, these are cute. They have a little bug on them. I have them with little frogs too. They're just great. So there you are. More questions?
Well, on the green one.
Yes.
Now.
Oh, what is that? Right.
Yeah, what is that?
That's an old one, and it's a nice box.
It's a green
I
one.
like it, particularly because of this multiple. That I liked what was possible to do. That material. So you look at it. Let me pass it through. Just take a look at it, and tell me what you see. Okay. Thank you.
There's something significant to that.
Just, first impression, you're going too far.
Well, two shadows, the shadows.
Typical. Can we see this one too?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, right. Well, the page that it was on.
We'll do that on
Where was the page it was on? I made this box a long time ago, and so somebody said, what is it? I said, they're rifles. They're actually rifle designs, but presented as if they're very live and colorful. But they sprouted dead little sprouts. So the story is that they are appealing, cut open rifles, producing something that really has no life. I told that to the person, she said, oh God, I don't want that box. But it's it's, in a way I like doing that. It's to provide contrasts, to provide contradictions, in a way that this does that too. It's a lemonade company that presents something, oh how wonderful you're using our lemonade, and at the same time they're peddling destruction. That's, so there is tension there. So the tension here, technical designs are wonderful. I mean, if you're into visual pleasure, technical drawings and including of rifles. If you see the inners, they're wonderful design pieces. I mean, it's real art. So, I couldn't resist it, and I couldn't resist giving it these wonderful colors.
Will you pass it around again?
Yeah.
So like a rifle on a cartoon when it blows up.
Yeah, right.
So the fact that you shredded the paper rods that tie in with the idea of a rifle?
Well, and I hadn't even thought about that.
Oh.
But that's kind of a nice idea. But sometimes you do these things and you're not aware of it. But subconsciously, you're using design. It's you say this is what I need to do this right. You're not conscious of it, but then somebody else remarks on it. And actually, yeah.
And it's like, as the creator, you plant the seed, and then we see the tulip that grows from the seed.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's almost as if they talk about when 6 different people feel different parts of an elephant, and they each come away with a
Right.
different sense of the elephant. Yeah.
Kipling's. That was
Yeah.
Kipling.
A question about this piece again.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me about World War I was the amount of people who died simply from disease and epidemics. And I was curious whether that was one of the themes you wanted to include.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
My focus in this story is about the obvious drama that repeats itself over and over again, and that these cards showed so clearly. and that it is a tragedy that repeats itself. So my phobia, you're right, and you know what is it?
I think almost more people died from disease
Well,
than
it
from the actual
coincided with the flu epidemic.
the Spanish flu.
Yeah, that is a big one, right? Worldwide, by the way. I mean, casualties everywhere across the world. Yeah.
My afterthought on this is that you chose to turn it into theater, where the military already uses that term
Right,
for
yeah.
Yes.
battle veterans.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So it's very appropriate.
So I'm on the same.
You're on the same
I'm on the
page.
same track.
Thank you so much.
Boy, you are-
When I think that Hidde first came to the United States to go to college and to study forestry, because there wasn't a whole lot of space in Holland and not too many trees growing. And I am so glad that the product that you ended up working with was the paper for the trees.
Right.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Okay. You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.